All right, so the CNCF just dropped their State of Cloud Native Development report for 2026, Q1 2026. If you're in DevOps, platform engineering, or CI/CD, or you just want to get a read on where the industry is actually heading, this is probably the most comprehensive data you're going to find right now about this. So I want to share with you a few findings that I think are worth pointing out. And there was one finding here that on the surface, I was alarmed by. But if you read the fine print, it makes a lot of sense. So this is a joint report between the CNCF and Slash Data. This is based on roughly 12,000 developers, and it represents folks across 100 countries. I think that's a really good sample size. So the first number I wanted to mention here is the fact that the report is based on 19.9 cloud native developers. So that's up from the previous report, which was around 15.6 million developers. That's like six months ago or so. Nearly 28% growth in half a year. How does that make sense? But if we scroll to page 10, they talk a little bit about this, saying that the context here is that part of the reason why the number jumped around is because they've expanded the definition of what cloud native really means. So it's beyond just a traditional backend infrastructure role. Game developers, industrial developers around IoT, they're now included. So this covers a broader population than previous editions. I don't think that's a problem. Cloud native practices are really spreading well outside infrastructure work, but it's worth knowing before you quote this in, say, a meeting with your boss. So jumping back to the top highlights here, 71% of backend developers are using at least one technology or practice associated with cloud native computing. Hybrid cloud is really taking off. It's at an all-time high, 34%, which is awesome. 88% of backend developers work with some form of DevOps standardization, which is also cool. And feature flags, this is something that I'll talk about a little bit later. Feature flags are now seen as a crucial gateway technology between mainstream infrastructure practices and more advanced practices like chaos engineering, etc. So we'll talk about all of that in this video. So scrolling to page 15, this was another point I made. If you want to get a sense of, who's actually using these technologies and these practices in the cloud native space and where it's landing, this will give you a sense. So the obvious candidates, DevOps at 55%, backend services at 53%, web backend development, 50%. So there are no surprises there. But when you start looking at the real numbers in machine learning and AI at 43%, at 42% rather, industrial IoT at 42%, even games at 39%. That's what the expansion story actually looks like in the data. If we scroll to page 16, you can see here that this is a development finding worth pausing on. Hybrid cloud is now an all-time high, 34% of developers deploying to it, and that's up from 22% in 2021. And on page 19 here, you can see that the public cloud is actually declining while hybrid continues to climb. The report attributes that things like data sovereignty, GDPR, regulatory pressure, particularly in finance and healthcare, for anyone building deployment tooling like we do at Octopus, that trend really matters. So managing deployments across on-prem cloud environments simultaneously is really meaningfully harder than, say, a pure cloud play. And more teams are in that situation more than in the past. Scrolling to page 22 here, you can see this is talking about more of the trends. This is a stat that I keep coming back to, which is 88% of backend developers now work with some form of DevOps standardization, which is up from 80% 6 months ago. The report also flags that the rise of IDPs, or internal developer platforms, is likely causing developers to stop self-reporting technology usage. So for example, they're running on Kubernetes, but they don't think of themselves as Kubernetes users because a platform is handling that for them under the covers. Scrolling to page 24, this is the one that I want to highlight the most. Here you can see a chart that talks about adoption of technologies, and as you can see, containers have dropped from above 60% to about 40%. And it looks like it's on a cliff edge, but that's not actually containers declining. It's containers becoming pretty much invisible. Developers are deploying containerized apps through platforms without ever seeing or writing a Docker file. And that's platform engineering working as intended. Scrolling to page 27, more talk about IDPs and DevOps practices. This is where that point is really made concrete. After Kubernetes, the most common technologies are front-end gateways, observability tools, event-driven architecture, and streaming and messaging services, all around 20 to 21%. Those are the next problems that teams reach for once their deployment pipeline is sorted. And that's the market these tools are operating in. The one highlight for me, which I thought was cool, was on page 37 here, which is talking about feature flagging. Feature flagging is up to 13% adoption on the technology chart, which looks pretty unremarkable, but where it sits on the journey map on this page here, which is right in the middle, in black, bridging the mainstream cloud native tier to the advanced practices below. Chaos engineering, mutable structure, infrastructure practices, multi-cluster management, service meshes. You don't tend to get there without going through feature flags first. And so the reason is fairly intuitive. Feature flags teaches teams how to decouple deployment from release. You ship code without exposing it to users. You test changes on a subset of traffic by turning on and off flags. And once you think of it that way, the mental leap to chaos engineering or immutable infrastructure is a lot smaller, which is why it's represented as a centerpiece here for the map itself. And it's less than a feature and more of a gateway, if you think of it that way, to a different type of operating within production. So in short, there's a lot more in here, but I didn't get to. But particularly the section around AI developers is kind of interesting. I've submitted the link in the comments here, so feel free to download and let me know what you think. If you've read it and you see something different than I do, say so. I'd love to see what people are seeing inside the report itself. All credit to the folks over at CNCF and /data for making this report possible. It's one of my favorite reports to read. Make sure to go check it out.